Welcome to Autistic Pride Day Symposium. I'm Kyriakos Gold. We are in Sydney at the Commons, and this session has been made possible because of the generous support from the City of Sydney. We're going to talk about media representations of autistic people, and I'm really excited about this panel. Autistic people, like really strong opinions on it, but I'm really looking forward to hear yours, Sandra. Do we see autistic people often on TV? And if we do so, or TV, on radio, or cinema, and if we do, what do we look like?
We see autistic characters on TV and in the cinema and in books. That's not the same as seeing autistic people, although I'm sure we'll go into how that's evolving, but we do see a lot of autistic characters, a lot of autistic portrayals in entertainment media, typically by non-autistic people, and very much stereotypical. So if we look at the media, what we see is white autistic males, typically young males, and in two roles, either presented as someone who's a burden to their family, you know, the family's trying to deal with this, we've got this autistic person and this is a problem, and how's the family going to cope with it and the stress that it causes, or we see superheroes. So we see autistic people with great skill, they're amazing doctors or they're amazing lawyers or they're amazing scientists, and that compensates for all these problems and burdens that come with them as autistic people. So we see these really narrow, stereotypical representations of autistic people that don't present us as whole people who are actually valuable for the people that we are.
What about programs like Love on the Spectrum? How do you feel about those? They're like a recent addition to our binge mania.
That's a very controversial one. I mean, personally, I have to say I'm not a fan of that particular program.
Thank God, because I'm not a fan either. But
I think that what happens a lot with those sorts of programs is that what we're doing is we're taking autistic people and we're making them entertainment for non-autistic people. So, you know, a lot of people say, oh, well, that's a great show because it shows autistic people and it shows them forming relationships and it's very heartwarming and it's very endearing. And I think why we watch an Attenborough documentary about meerkats, and it's very heartwarming and it's very entertaining and endearing. And as an autistic person, I don't want to be portrayed that way. And those programs are they're great for, you talk to parents and they say, oh, you know, that was really reassuring for me. You know, my child will grow up and they will fall in love and they will form a relationship. Is that what those people want? And I also think there's a very artificial element of that. We take a very specific, limited cohort of autistic people who meet this expectation of what the producers want autistic people to look like. Mm-hmm. And then we put them in these dating situations, often that make them really uncomfortable. I mean, why would you take a bunch of autistic people speed dating? I mean, personally, it's not a dating option that many of us would choose. And then we get relationship coaches in to teach them how to act like neurotypical people on a date, which is like how not to be you so that other people will like you. So to me, there's a lot of negative messages in there. And I just think it's very obtrusive. It's very much, let's put the autistic person there as entertainment for the non-autistic people, and we can, you know, all kind of think that they're very cute and very endearing and entertaining.
I feel like I felt back in the 90s as a gay person, when all the gay characters were caricatures back then. Yep. They were just monodimensional, and it was like, I'm not that person, like, oh, sometimes I am, but like I couldn't relate. And I also feel the same now as an autistic person, that it's just my most difficult situations in my everyday life is the dating component. That's the most difficult part of my life. And I just feel that's people's entertainment.
That's right. And it is that very very specific, as you say. We take those really stereotypical aspects of it. We put autistic people in situations which are not the way that autistic people date. I mean, I dated, I'm married, I'm very happily married. You know, I know lots of autistic people who are very happily in relationships.
I'm not.
You're not?
I'm single.
Okay, well, if anyone's looking, yeah?
If anyone's looking.
If anyone's looking, right, we have a very eligible young man here. But we don't typically meet people in those ways. Yeah. And the idea that, you know, that's what it looks like. And I'm not sure that we're creating the right expectations there either for people that should be the outcome, that being in this relationship look like this is what success looks like. Because for some people it is, and for some people it isn't. And I guess also for me, like if I was to title that show, I wouldn't have called it Love on the Spectrum. I would have called it Not Finding Love on a very narrow part of the spectrum.
But do you remember what it was called in the UK? Because the show isn't called Love on the Spectrum. It's actually originally from a UK show. So I don't know if you know about this, but the show is originally called The Undateables.
Oh my God.
So, I mean, thank God they changed the name, but it's kind of important that we need to kind of understand that.
Yeah. And speaking of the dating conversation for autistic people, I wanted us to have a little clip for the online audience of the movie you've produced. Mm-hmm. So let's watch that first. What were you thinking when you produced this movie, Kyle, and how close is it to your actual life, if you want to share?
I will say my mum is not a raging crazy person like that who picks up a salt shaker and decides to think that it's some sort of anal dildo, thank God. I think that's a really close thing. I wrote it and I produced it and I came up with the original concept around about 5 to 6 years ago when I was working at a film festival and just considering the way in which things were and kind of looking at my own life and my own ideas of dating and just all the crazy stories that I had coming into the idea of thinking about the world of dating, thinking about sensitivity, thinking about the way in which things are oversensitive. And I almost just wanted to find a space to be able to be like, hey, I want to have my piece of cake and eat it too. So I think that's where, you know, the idea of Nate and the idea of the main character of Neuromance was born. And I'm really proud to see it getting an audience. You know, we're screening it both here and internationally. And I think people are really seeing the film for this kind of love letter to a person whose just brain is wired differently.
Yeah. I have to admit, this was the second time that I watched it. And it's such a heartwarming film, but I did have a little tear. And I was like, when they said, no one's gonna love you because you're autistic. And I've never really reflected on that in my everyday life, but that hit me like a ton of bricks. It was just really difficult to watch. Now, and I wonder if things have changed since the first moment that you had that idea, I want to put this to film, till today. What you see out there, is it getting better or is it less?
I think it is getting better. Look, I will say that we created this show, we created this short film with a whole bunch of great people, including my fantastic team. We created it so long ago that I think it has become better and there has been lots more great representation, great intersectional representation for autistic people. And, you know, I think what is great about it is that we're having more conversations. People are creating more content and more ideas that are based around intersectionality, about disability, about the intersections between queerness and disability, the intersections between disability and other parts of the community as well. And I think the more stories that we create will only help amplify the conversation and provide agency for people to have support over their own voices. And I said it in another podcast, and I'm going to say it here as well, is for anyone who's listening at home, who's watching this, who wants to be able to create, who wants to be able to tell their own story, I would just say, please go and do it. I know it takes a long time, but you are becoming part of the conversation. And the reason why I'm sitting here today is because Kyriakos saw the film and so many people can see your world, and you have the ability of telling your own story, which I think is so important. So I would just want to put that out there.
And I think for me, the connection with the film is that intersectional one. It's like both the LGBT component. the grinder story and the autistic story coming together. And potentially this is the most difficult panel for me to facilitate because I'm so triggered. So forgive me if my questions are not making a lot of sense. I wanted to go back to Sandra, and often when I talk to people about being uncomfortable with what I see on TV in terms of autistic representation, they look at me funny. And they say, why don't you like this show? I mean, it's just a great heartwarming show. How do we respond to this?
It's difficult to respond to because people are so used to those stereotypes, and they'll say, well, aren't you pleased that those characters are there and those shows are there, and we're seeing, and I think a lot of it comes from we're supposed to be grateful that we're now autistic characters are there and they weren't before, so that's a great step forward, and autistic stories are being told, and so you should be pleased about that. And it is hard to kind of say to people, well, actually, we want to be seen as holistic people, and that those make me uncomfortable because that's not actually the way that our lives are. And it's really quite demeaning to say, let's present this autistic person as a burden. And whether we're looking at reality shows or we're looking at entertainment shows, there, as you said, there are some good examples coming out, but there's still an awful lot of stuff where the storyline is that this autistic character is a burden, right? So it's about, the family and their child's been diagnosed and how are they going to cope with it? Or, another show we all know, The Good Doctor, which everyone knows The Good Doctor, right? And that brings both of those storylines together. Here's this character who is, he's brilliant. He's a brilliant doctor, right? But he has to be a brilliant doctor, not just a good doctor, which is the title of the show, but he has to be a brilliant doctor in order to be accepted and in order to compensate for the fact that he's autistic. And because he's autistic, he is a burden on his mentor. He is a burden on his best friend. He is a burden on the people that he's in a relationship.
Everything's so played up as well. Yeah. Everything is so his meltdowns, everything is so played up for the idea of this. But it's just annoying. I feel like it's such an unfortunate thing where we could have a show like The Good Doctor, which really represents such a really dichotomy of ideas and things like that. But it's not. It's just like, let's just write an autistic character who is an amazing superhero and he gets into meltdowns. And it's like, it's so one-sided, it's so basic.
So how does that affect workplace when bosses and colleagues only watch that, only see that? How does it affect our relationships? Hugely,
because not just in the workplace, in education, in everywhere, people think that's what autism looks like. Right? And so, one of the things that every autistic person's heard, and I would say more so if they happen to be female or they happen to be anything that doesn't look like that stereotype, is, but you don't look autistic, or, but I've seen The Good Doctor, or I've seen Rain Man. So you couldn't possibly be autistic. And it actually makes it really difficult for people to actually really be their authentic selves, because there's this expectation that either A, you're not autistic because you don't look like that, or B, oh great, you're autistic, so you must be brilliant at this thing and that thing, and you will have these challenges and you will have those strengths. And it denies who we are as a holistic being. And the other thing that's missing from those portrayals is autistic people living normal lives where the story isn't about their autism. There are very few portrayals in entertainment media or in reality shows where the storyline isn't the person's autism, right? So it's either about their diagnosis and the burden they place on their family, or in, mystery shows, it's about, and you'll see police dramas. Every police drama series ever made has an episode with an autistic character in, where either the autistic person murdered somebody, and then we find out it's because they misunderstood something, or they saw the murder but they can't tell anybody because they can't speak, and the amazing detective figures it out. But we don't see autistic characters just being people, like in normal jobs, living normal lives, doing normal things. Heartbreak High, we've now seen that. That's a really good example where we have a character that is not just about the fact that that character is autistic.
I have a question about that. I've watched the 2 seasons just loved it, okay? So I loved the show. However, my autistic mind has picked up on 20%, 15 to 20% exaggeration of the autistic characteristics of the character in season 2. So my media hat here says the success of the show meant that it needs to go to a bigger audience, and because of that, we've now crafted the characters a little bit differently. What are your views on that? Did you pick up on that?
I have to admit I haven't watched season 2, but I think that is one of the problems when you ask that question earlier about what are these portrayals, what's the impact of that in employment. We're still very much at that point where people have to see autism lived large, like the comment you made about the Good Doctor and the meltdowns have to be huge. People want to see an autistic character that looks so autistic and looks like the autism that they expect. And that comes into that whole issue of autistic characters and the decision that they make when they're making a show. Are we going to make this a canon character or coded character? So are we going to say this is an autistic character, or are we not going to say that and we're going to put those characteristics in it? You play up the autistic characteristics so people say, oh yes, that's an autistic character.
Like Sheldon.
Yes, like Sheldon. Now, is Sheldon autistic or not? There's all those debates about that. And that brings in that other whole dynamic. And I've seen a lot of commentators on Sheldon's character who say that there was a deliberate decision made not to say Sheldon's autistic, because if you actually said he was autistic, people would really point out the fact that they actually make him quite awful in a lot of ways. By not officially saying he's autistic, you can make him do all kinds of awful things. And everyone who watches that show says, oh yes, he's a horrible human being because he's autistic. And we can make fun of him because he's autistic, but the producers don't get into trouble because they didn't actually say he was autistic. So I think that comes down to, when you say, is there pressure on the show to make that character more autistic? It's because we don't have enough of those representations, and we don't have enough genuine, authentic representations of autistic people at the proportion that we exist in the population. In TV shows where they're teachers, they're doctors, they're police officers, they're mums, they're dads, they're school children, they're all of the other things that we could be doing in life. We don't see that. So there's this pressure on this autistic character to be this, DSM valid version of autism to convey this message, because there's just not enough valid representation.
For clarity, autistic. I really enjoyed Heartbreak High season 2 for an extra reason. The character unmasks on purpose, and you kind of see the struggle of masking. It's like, this is how I look when I'm masking and I'm not enjoying myself, and this is what I'm like unmasked. So that I really enjoyed, but still also felt that it was a bit exaggerated. Kyle, what are your views on what we see now in media, and has anyone reflected on the fact that there's 5 characters, and it's those 5 characters that we can talk about?
I would say, from a sort of writer-producer perspective and sort of looking at the industry from such a sort of different way, I'm really proud that our industry is having a lot of these conversations about whose story can be told and how they can be told. It was not 5 or 10 years ago that we were not having such a big conversation about the way in which anyone with a disability, anyone with a lived experience that differs from a very specific part that would be introduced into the industry. And I think I'm so proud and honoured to be part of an industry that is starting to have these conversations and starting to break down a lot of these barriers around who can tell these sort of stories. And I absolutely get there is still work to be done, and I think it's important for us as a community, as storytellers, to be able to bring new voices in and not monopolize people to only say this is only one person that can have one particular thing. But I think that there are so many really great shows, and while it's not about autism, I recently watched Erotic Stories on SBS, and that the intersection between queerness and disability as a whole was so brilliant and so beautiful that actually made me tear up and cry, because that whole thing about sexuality and sex and being in a club was just so beautiful, and the character of, I can't remember his name, but the one who had the physical disability was just so like me, and I went, oh my God, that's like me, oh my God, how is this happening? But I just feel like that there is so many great places, and I, as I said before, I think we just need to make sure that we need to support those storytellers and provide that level of agency so that they can provide a level of seeing their stories on screen like I have had the opportunities to do.
Has either of you seen that Amazon movie, Red, White and Blue, like the one with the two princes,
Yeah, Red, White and Royal Blue, yeah.
Have you seen that, Sandra?
No.
So it's basically a story about the Prince of whatever, England, and the son of the president of the US, and they have a gay romance. And in terms of gay representation, when I watched that, I thought, oh, this is how young girls feel when they watch the normal prince and princess story. And as an autistic person, I've never felt that. I've never really seen something that has given me hope or something like that.
Have you not seen As We See It on Amazon Prime?
No, I haven't.
It's so beautiful and amazing. It's from the guy who did Friday Night Lights. Anyone has seen it, it's amazing.
So that one piece of work out there in the millions of movies and series is the only one that would give us hope in terms of like a happier future.
And I think that's why we're saying there needs to be so many more, because the fact that we can sit here and we can say, here's one, we're so excited, there's one, that's really disturbing. And I'm going to give you two examples here. Now, these two caveats here. These are two shows I have not seen, and they both have the stereotype there, they're about white males. But I wanted to talk about something when you were talking about changes and conversations. So there's the new ABC show Austin, which has Michael Theo, who was from Love on the Spectrum, but Michael Theo, who's an autistic actor who's now playing an autistic character in an Australian TV series. And I know that in producing that, I don't know a lot about the show, I haven't seen it, but I know they said to him, we actually want you to be your authentic self in this show and not act. I think that's the sort of conversations that we need to be having. Okay. And there's also an American movie coming out called Ezra, which again, it's about a young autistic boy and his father's journey, when he found out his son was autistic. But another good example where, they were insistent on having an autistic actor play the boy, an autistic associate producer, who's the guy who set up Wrong Planet. And they actually did a lot of work on the set of that movie around all of the people involved in the movie had to do an autism education program that the associate producer ran. They looked at things like, how are we going to set up the set? Where are we going to put the trailers because of the noise? I think the industry, as you said, is starting to really see that we actually need to make, it's not about just saying, oh, let's have a show, let's pop an autistic character in there, let's cast an autistic actor, but we need to actually cast one who can work in the environment that we've got, and if they can't, we'll just sack them and get someone else. Because I think for too long that's been the excuse. We want an autistic character, but we can't have an autistic actor because it won't work, because it's too demanding and the lights are too bright and there's too much noise and they'll never learn the script. And I think we're starting to see some change there around, well, how can we actually adapt the industry to suit the actors so they can actually be themselves and not we'll have to pretend to be them.
So it's really interesting. I didn't know that. I was just reflecting as you were talking to it. So the pathway for this actor was to be in a reality show, which is the pathway for a lot of neurotypical influencers or future actors. But in this case, by participating in that reality, he was exposing himself to an unsafe environment and also putting himself in a box in terms of any job that he can do in the future. But is this the path forward? Is this what we have to work with?
I think at the moment we have very limited paths forward because unfortunately there are not a lot of opportunities for autistic actors. You've probably broken the mould here in terms of autistic writers and producers, but there's not that many opportunities because we do have, so many barriers. I mean, if I take it right back to writing, and this is something we were talking about on the break, if we go right back to the story writing that drives entertainment media, I run creative writing workshops for autistic people, children and adults. And what I find is these amazing creative people who come to me, and my youngest participant in my current workshops is 7, the oldest is 73. Every single one of them has had a terrible experience at school where they were told, you can't write, you're not creative, you don't do it the right way. And they're also amazingly talented, right? But we think differently and we work differently, and these people are not given the opportunity to write their stories. If they can't write their stories, then how do they, so it's because, we provide this opportunity for autistic people to write as autistic people. We're still at that stage. We shouldn't be at that stage, but we're still at that stage where we're saying we actually have to create opportunities for autistic people to act in an autistic safe space, to write in an autistic safe space. And at the moment, that is the way, because for an autistic person to try and get a role in a mainstream TV show, there's so many other barriers. But I think, we need to start small, but we need to start fighting really hard, right? When we see that those opportunities are not there, we need to advocate.
So in your plans, are you planning on always having an autistic character in your work, or that's not something that you've got in mind? It just happens. You write or you try to produce different things. How does that work for you?
I'll start by because I want to go back to what Sandra was talking about in terms of this particular thing. And I think this is a really important part of bringing up something that the industry has really started to look at, which is this concept known as access coordinators. I don't know if you've heard about this. So this is really a really important way of taking the agency away from disabled people and putting it towards somebody that they feel the safety to go to, another disabled person who works in conjunction with the production to make it easier. So they say, these are my access requirements. This is my access writer, and they have the opportunity of feeling safe and supported by going to that person, and then that access coordinator then goes to the production and then says, hey, this is this person's access requirements, not noting who the person actually is, but this is the stuff that you really need to cater to. So I think that's really important. And the other thing I was going to say in terms of script writing, I think it's really important because I think we, as disabled people or autistic people, we get lost in the conversation regarding emerging technology. I think what's really interesting is the use of artificial intelligence and AI in terms of helping sort of break some of the connections and the issues that we have between the idea of getting stuff made and actually developed. So, if your son has an issue with the idea of, say, making something into a script, they could turn the idea and use ChatGPT to say, hey, can you write this in a screenplay format? And ChatGPT will analyze all of the screenplay formats and actually say, hey, this is actually something, this is what it's going to turn into. And so it utilizes that sort of thing. So I think that's always really important to understand that just because somebody has a different way of working doesn't mean they are either completely inept or they're not able to be a part of this beautiful industry that I'm in. In terms of my work, it's sort of become something that I would love to continue doing. I mean, a lot of my work right now is about bodily autonomy when it comes to autistic individuals. I am working on a couple of scripts right now that look specifically at the role of how autism is placed and stuff like that. My next idea is still about autism, and I've been workshopping a sort of feature right now that looks also at autism. And I think it's just a no-brainer. Like, audiences can see through the bullshit. And I think that, it's happened before where people have cast non-disabled people in disabled roles, and it's not good. And I think because the disability rate of employment is so low, it's just kind of a no-brainer to find that person who can provide stuff. And, for Neuromance, we were so honored and privileged to have our amazing actor, Will, who's actually now internationally training in both the US and the UK. And it was so awesome. And I'm so honored to hopefully give another autistic person that level of privilege as well. And even if that means that not even an acting, but a producer role, giving them producer attachments and giving people the support to be able to,
go further.
This is more just an observation that I made recently. I was watching the movie Police Academy. Has anyone watched the movie Police Academy?
So long ago.
So long ago. I was very young when I watched that movie for the first time. It's a movie from the 80s, and it was incredibly funny. And now that I have a better understanding of neurological difference, I realize in that movie quite a lot of the characters were neurologically different. And it made me realize that a lot of neurodivergent characteristics, particularly in the 80s, were linked to comedy. And so that's more just an observation, but I'd be interested to hear what your thoughts are on whether that was a positive or negative representation of neurological difference.
What a great point, bringing that movie. We all know that movie, and I don't remember it that well. Sandra, you'd be the best person for
Yeah,
this.
so that goes back to what I was saying before about that whole canon or coded, are we identifying someone as autistic? It's a really tricky ground, because I think the question needs to be, are we laughing with the person or are we laughing at the person? And I actually reviewed a paper for a journal recently that was about that, and it was talking about that humour, and it actually was referring to, I strongly disagreed with the writers of the article actually, because they were talking about in reality shows featuring autistic and other disabled people, and they were talking about how the humour was endearing where the parents were laughing, and to me that's still very much we're laughing at, not laughing with. So to me, an autistic comedian who stands up on a stage and makes jokes in the context of, this is a funny thing that happened in my life or a funny thing that I did, and they have agency, they are choosing to see the humour in that, right? And they're commenting on how their neurological differences create funny situations. To me, that's a positive thing, that's an affirming thing. But where we take a person and we create humour out of their situation, either by saying they're autistic or implying they're autistic, and we are laughing at that person and that person is not aware that there's a joke and they are not participating actively in that joke, I think that's a negative, because I think that is really demeaning and saying autistic people are there for us to laugh at. They are faulty, they are deficient, and that's entertaining for us, and I think that's a really problematic space.
That ethical storytelling piece that comes with it. What happened to you when I asked you to participate in this session? What was the first thing you wanted to share? I'll start with Kyle.
I think I was just happy to be a part of a panel that could, because I think that it's just, I mean, Neuromance has really been a way of thank you to all of my team who have supported me on this journey and stuff like that, because it's really given it the opportunity for me to be able to tell a story that's so important to me. And I want to thank you for having this opportunity of engaging with other creatives and people so that we can, find a way of continually being a part of, understanding ourselves. And hopefully someone watch this and be like, oh my God, that Kyle dude is awesome. And maybe I'll date, I'm joking. But hopefully someone will look at this and go oh my God, that's cool. And then, maybe, hopefully not 7 or 8 years, but maybe in a time they'll look at this talk and realize that they're really excited, and maybe they'll have the opportunity of actually making something themselves. And maybe I'll be going to, Sydney Film Festival right now and seeing their film up on the big screen and being yeah, that's awesome. So yeah, in terms of the first thing I thought of, I was well, hey, this is cool, amazing, I'm gonna be part of this.
Sandra, it's your area of study and expertise, and you have a book as well. So after you tell us what was your first thought, I want you to please plug your book.
Okay, so my first thought when you told me about the symposium and you sent me all the topics, I thought, oh, so many things, I want to be on every panel. And then I saw the media one and I was like, oh, media one's in Sydney. I'm going to Sydney, I'm from Melbourne, because it's something I'm so passionate about. I've done a lot of research in this area. And I just think there's just so much that needs to happen. In my spare time, which I have lots of, not really, I'm a creative writer. I write fiction, and all of my fiction has autistic characters and doing regular things. They have real jobs and real lives, and that's something I'm really passionate about, and I think we need a lot more of that. And yes, I do have a book. I wrote this book called Going Into Autism. So that's me on the cover, drawn by Chloe van der Rijden, who's an amazing artist. Which is about being autistic, and it explains autism from the inside of an autistic. So what's it actually like? What does it feel like? But also, what does it feel like not to be autistic? So kind of trying to draw that bridge between autistic and non-autistic people. And it was, for me, it was life-changing because what happened was I wrote that and suddenly so many people started writing to me and saying, I've read your book and now I understand myself, I feel more comfortable with myself. Or I read your book and I went and got a diagnosis. Or I read your book and now I understand my partner who's autistic. And I thought, this is what I want to do with my life. I want to write and I want to help people. And I quit my job working at a uni and now I write and I talk and I just, yeah. So the idea of coming and talking about media and writing and creative stuff and you know, if I get to do anything for the rest of my life, it's going to be about inspiring autistic people to really explore their creativity and really acknowledge that we just have so much to offer in this space. As your movie showed us, that autistic people have them. We're not all mathematicians and computer geeks, you know, we just have so much creativity and imagination.
No, some of us are Twitch streamers.
So, and you know, this is what the whole idea behind Autistic Pride Day Symposium was, to make a safe space for autistic people, but for everyone else that comes to this, and even the production team that's working with us today, to understand what's really happening to the autistic person when they're liaising with me during an event and how we can take this further. And hopefully everyone then goes on to another project, into another project, into another project, and we just create meaningful, positive change. Thank you so much. This was our panel on media representation of autistic people. We'll have more panels coming shortly. I'm Kyriakos Gold, and this is Autistic Pride Day Symposium in Sydney.